Next week, a massive set of balance changes is going to go live for StarCraft 2 Legacy of the Void multiplayer. Obviously, this is something that has been tested for quite a little bit of time. I believe I made a video initially back in August where I went over all of the changes that they had announced. But today, I want to be going over the final version of it and what we will actually be playing next week. Now, before we jump into anything, okay, I do want to let you know that the changes that we're going to be talking about right now today are not going to be perfectly balanced for the multiplayer version of the game. There's going to be a lot of people that may not like these. There's going to be a lot of people that may feel like they're getting nerfed or they're getting overbuffed or whatever. But before you go off and complain on the Battle.net forums and Reddit and in the comment section down below, I do want to let you know that the thoughts behind these changes are really awesome. Basically, units such as the Infestor are very uncommon, such as the Swarmhost are very uncommon. Terran Mech, very uncommon as well. Stargate play for the Protoss, you know, past like the harassment version, I guess in the earlier stages of the game, is very uncommon. And the entire goal behind these changes is to make the units that are underperforming and the segments of the game that are underperforming more interesting. Right now, as it is in Legacy of the Void, so in the current version, the game is practically perfectly balanced. I mean, we see competitors at the highest level for each and every race, but, you know, for example, all of the Terran players are playing bio-based armies, so that means it's like Marine Marauder medevac-based armies, and they've got an entire segment of units that just doesn't really get touched all too often, unless it's sort of in a weird scenario. So today, these changes are probably not going to be perfectly balanced just yet, but we are most definitely going to be seeing changes as well over the next couple of months. And in a year or so from now, I think that StarCraft 2 will be in a better stage. Now, one thing to note as well is the reason why they are putting these changes up right now is because the WCS Grand Finals has happened, BlizzCon has wrapped up, the World Champion of StarCraft 2 has been crowned. So that does mean that we've got a bit of a lull, I suppose, before the new competitive season begins in early 2017. So today, we're going to be going over all of the changes. I'm going to try and explain everything that you need to know. And we're going to be starting with none other than the Terran. Biological compositions feel in a pretty great place right now for Terran, but we believe it is essential for the race to have more diversity in how it's played. To achieve this, we must make factory and starport based compositions more compelling, and so we're making a wealth of changes to units produced from these structures. So first and foremost, we got a redesign to the Cyclone. The Cyclone is being redesigned into a frontline anti-armored damage dealer. It can now be produced from reactors while being cheaper, beefier, and a bit slower. It also now possesses a much bigger punch versus ground units. Supply cost has been decreased from 4 to 3, health increased from 120 to 180, movement speed has been decreased, no longer requires a tech lab to construct it, reactors can now produce 2 at a time, cost reduced as well as a lock-on ability that now only targets air. This is going to be an anti-ground only unit, the damage has been decreased, the attack speed has been increased, the range has been increased, and the anti-air basic attack has been removed. Now, what does this mean? Before these changes, you know, basically go live, as it is right now in StarCraft 2, the Cyclone is a unit that is very uncommon. The only time you really see it is in Terran versus Protoss in particular, when the Terran player is aware of the fact that the Protoss is opening up with something like a War Prism, and they can quite easily snipe that using the lock-on ability. Now, I've been playing the balanced test map for quite a little bit, and I would say that the Cyclone is probably one of the biggest changes that they have made. It's a significantly different unit as we do know it right now, and I would say it's actually far better as well. It seems to be far more well-rounded, I suppose. You can really start pushing in the earlier stages of the game, and one of the compositions that's very common right now is for people to go for something like Hellion Cyclone, or like, for example, going for like Cyclone Hellbat, or even like Cyclone drops have been a thing, and they actually deal with pretty much all of the units that you can throw at them a little bit better, at the very least as far as ground play goes. Now, for Zerg vs Terran, for example, the unit seemed really very powerful, in particular initially, but a lot of Zerg players have started opening up to 2-base mutas, and 2-base mutas used to be a very common build order until the meta changes, and once again, that is going to be a strategy that is very good against this. If your opponent is opening up with heavy Cyclone play, you can actually just kill it with 2-base muta. And obviously neither mutas, or neither Cyclones rather, and Hellbats will really be able to shoot up. So mutas are practically the hard counter to this, but it now all of a sudden sort of like serves as a stepping stone, the Cyclone that is, to higher tier units. And I really quite like that. Whereas in the past you only really could play heli and hellbat sort of pushes when you were trying to go for mechanical based armies. Now you can use the Cyclone as like a stepping stone as well to get up towards stores, to get up towards, for example, siege tanks, to get up to like higher tech units, and it's actually really quite nice. Now once again, this may very well be overpowered, we currently don't know, but it definitely is a change that is very nice to see, as the Cyclone is a pretty cool unit. It just wasn't really something we saw nearly as often as we probably should have. Next up, another major change for Terran mech, and that is going to be the siege tank. So you know right now how a tank can be sieged up, it can be dropped by a medevac. Sort of feels like a Reaver from Brood War, but not really. It's kind of a different unit at that point in the game because it's so early. Anyhow, that can no longer happen. Siege tanks cannot actually be picked up by a medevac anymore unless they are unsieged, just like they always could, also back in Wings of Liberty days. However, the damage has been increased significantly. So the damage has increased from 35 plus 15 to armored to 40 plus 30 to armored. What exactly does this mean? Well, this basically means that in defensive kind of positions, the unit is going to be significantly better, in particular against armored units, such as Marauders, such as Immortals, such as, for example, Roaches. They're going to be able to deal a ton of damage to that. But if you're trying to use them offensively, the unit is going to be very difficult to pull off, as you won't be able to just simply drop all of the siege tanks down and go from there. Now, I've played quite a little bit of Terran versus Terran in the balance changes, and I would say this is actually one of the most difficult and most tactical units in the game right now. It's very cool, but if you make one misstep with your forces and, you know, the siege tank is able to get a couple of hits off, that's basically game over right there. But if you manage to, you know, push a little bit too aggressively with the siege tank as well, and you're not sieged up when your opponent pushes in and, you know, you're not in range of the previous siege tank or whatever, you really need to, like, leapfrog them forward, you can easily lose the game. So I'm actually a massive fan of these changes. I think this is much more to the lore of a siege tank as well. You know, it's supposed to be like a big, massive unit that deals a lot of damage to units that are close to it. And it sometimes felt like it wasn't too impactful. Now, you may notice right here that the base damage has been increased a little bit as well. It's from 35 to 40. This is actually, you know, not that noticeable, in particular in Terran versus Zerg, where the unit is probably going to be most common, as well as in Terran versus Terran. But, you know, in particular, the armor tech is very interesting, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in just a little bit once we go over the other changes. Then we also got the Crucio Shock Cannon, which is what I learned to be the attack name, apparently, of the siege tank. I didn't even know that. It decreased from 1 attack per 2 seconds to 1 attack per 2.14 seconds. So it attacks slightly slower than we know it right now, which is going to be taking a little bit of getting used to. But it's fine. But I would say this and the Cyclone change are going to be the main ones for the Terran pieces that will really change up the meta game quite a little bit and will make mech quite a little bit more powerful as well. So notice right away, they can't shoot up or whatever. Once again, the Cyclone can't shoot up either, and so, you know, can't the siege tank for obvious reasons. So pretty much all of the other races are going to be able to deal with Terran mech by playing air-based armies, at the very least initially. That is what my instinct is telling me, and what I've been playing quite a little bit as well. Then we've also got the Battle Cruiser. The energy bar has been removed. Abilities now no longer require energy. Instead, each ability has a separate 71-second cooldown. So we got the Yamato cannon for the Battle Cruiser, as well as the Tactical Jump. Tactical Jump you can use anywhere on the map, and the, you know, Battle Cruiser will jump to that point. You can now queue up the Yamato cannon right after using Tactical Jump. So what, for example, you can do is, you've got a couple of Battle Cruisers, you fly to behind someone's base, you queue up the Yamato cannon, nuke down the base, and then Tactical Jump out of there to safety once again. That is something you can do, and something that's actually surprisingly powerful, but honestly, Battle Cruisers are still very unique in the fact that they are very expensive, and in many games they won't be very viable. This is obviously a slight buff to them, so in particular in like the Terran versus Terran matchup, this is something we could see more often. It used to be pretty common already in the, you know, previous version of the game, to like a late stage kind of army where people have sort of depleted a lot of their resources and they've got maxed out armies and they're up against siege tank lines and all that. Yamato cannon could actually be pretty good against sieged up tanks, for example, but I don't think we're going to be seeing the Battle Cruiser a whole lot in Terran versus Protoss and Terran versus Zerg. Now, there are also a couple of minor changes to the Terran pieces, and they actually play out pretty significantly, but they're labeled as simple changes right here, so let's address those as well and talk about what exactly they mean. So, first and foremost, we got the Thor. The Javelin Missile, which is the anti-air attack of the Thor, the radius has increased from 0.5 to 0.6. What this means is that it's going to be significantly better, in particular against Mutalisks. It may not sound very significant, and, you know, the damage hasn't gone up or anything right now. They have discussed that, and they have made some test plays with that. It turned out to be a little bit too powerful. But it is still going to be better against clumped up Mutalisk in particular, or if the Zerg player isn't microing perfectly, the Thor is going to be able to be a lot better as an anti-air unit as it was in the past, making it more interesting in that regard as well. Because keep in mind, Cyclones won't be able to shoot up anymore, or at the very least they can, I guess, without, you know, they can't, I guess, with the without the lock-on ability. But Thors are going to be a very, very good counter to that. Now we got the Banshee as well. Remove the fusion core requirement for the Hyperflight rotors. So the Hyperflight rotors is a really cool upgrade that doesn't really see a whole lot of playtime either. Basically what it is a speed upgrade, a speed buff to the Banshee, and in the past you would really only see it in a late stage kind of moment, I suppose, but usually Terrans would just opt for, you know, a bit of a more powerful harassment option, such as like a medevac drop. Has a lot more potential than a Banshee. But right now you will have late game harassment options as well when you are going for mechanical based armies. Plus you could go for a timing attack with the Hyperflight rotors, for example, against Terran, Protoss and Zerg. Really, you can pull it off in each and every one of the matchups. You gotta keep in mind though, if you want to go for the harass here, you will have to make a choice between getting the cloak on the Banshee or between getting the speed upgrade on the Banshee. But I would say this is going to be a good change to make harassment options a little bit more prevalent, in particular for Terran mech in the later stages of the game. Next up, we got the Viking. Now, this is actually one of my favorite changes. Not a lot of people are talking about this one, but I really, really like it. The ground mode now has +8 mechanical damage. What exactly does that mean? So, you know that Vikings can land, right? They can transform from, you know, their air status as opposed to landing on the ground and dealing damage right there. It won't really affect Terran versus Zerg at all because, you know, Zerg units aren't mechanical. But what is, for example, mechanical is something like a probe or an SCV. What is actually common right now in the balanced test map is that Vikings are gonna fly across the map. They're gonna land behind a mineral line and they will be able to start shooting away at the workers of their opponents. And it's actually surprisingly powerful. They do way better against mechanical units right now. So that does mean that the Viking as a landed option, as a ground-based option, is all of a sudden viable. Something that we didn't see whatsoever before these changes. And really the only moment where a Terran would land their Vikings is if they already had won the game. To sort of like put a nail in the coffin, I suppose. But right now, it's going to be a legitimate anti-ground type of unit as well when you land the Vikings. And actually what was common for a little while is for people to open up with a starport with a reactor and then actually push with the Viking, which is ridiculous. Like, that would be their opening right there. No more, you know, Hellion openers, no more Cyclone opener. That would actually open up with double Viking harass, which, you know, is just unheard of. Anyway, before I fanboy more about the Viking, let's talk about the Liberator. Remove the plus light damage for the anti-air attack. So basically what they're trying to do is to make the Thor a better, well-rounded anti-air unit. So it's going to be much more powerful against, in particular, units that are going to be light, such as the Mutalisk. Because of the fact that the Liberator is losing that plus light damage for its anti-air attack. And Mutas are going to definitely be pretty powerful, in particular against mech-based armies that don't quite have Thors in it yet. So, Liberator is getting a slight nerf. I think that is a good thing. The Liberator always has felt like an extremely well-rounded unit. It isn't losing its anti-air attack, it's just losing the bonus damage that it does to, for example, Mutalisk. Or really, I think Mutalisk are the only flying light unit. Am I crazy? And then we've got the Raven. Now, the Raven is getting quite a couple of changes to it as well. And that is going to be, first and foremost, the auto turret damage has been increased significantly. Then we've got the Seeker Missile now has a new upgrade. And this is kind of powerful. This is kind of insane. But anyways, we got the increasing of the Seeker Missile tracking range by 50% and increases the damage by 30% as well. There's gonna be some insane games, okay? I can call it right now. There's gonna be some insane games where the Terran will turtle on like 3 or 4 bases. They will max out, they will have a bunch of Seeker Missiles in their army, and they will absolutely obliterate their opponent. And it will feel like you're pretty much helpless. You need to start worrying about Ravens. Ravens are going to be a significant unit to deal with, and you're going to just simply have to micro extremely well because they are going to be powerful and maybe a little bit too strong, but I guess only time will tell. Next up, we got the multiplayer changes to the Swarm. Similar to our goals with Terran, our main objective with the Zerg is to improve the diversity of unit compositions. We would like to achieve a good balance between the Roach Ravager, Zergling Baneling, and Hydralisk base play while empowering some of the underutilized support units, such as the Swarm Host and Infestor. Well, that sounds like music to my ear. Being a Zerg player at heart, I do play all of the races, but being a Zerg player at heart, I really like the idea of this, because Zerg doesn't really have all too many units, at the very least like fighting type of units compared to the other races. So first and foremost, we got the Hydralisk. It is being transformed into a core tech option for Zerg. It has become much stronger on creep and is also seeing a general buff to its combat effectiveness to make it more appealing to use. So first off, we got the upgrade split, just like we had it in Wings of Liberty as well as in Heart of the Swarm. We got a split between Muscular Augments as well as Grooved Spines. Muscular Augment has still a cost of 150, 71 seconds research time, and it increases the base movement speed by 25%. Now notice right here that this is also going to increase the base movement speed on creep, something that we didn't see this significantly in the past. Hydras are going to be significantly faster on creep, and actually very noticeably so. So if you're trying to defend something in the earlier stages of the game with Hydralisk, it all of a sudden is a good option, as long as your creep spread is up to par as well. Say we got a Terran player that is pushing onwards, you aren't going for your roaches anymore because roaches are armored, so the siege tanks are going to shred through them. If your creep spread is on point, Hydralisk can actually close the distance very quickly on creep. They are extremely fast on creep, and they will obviously be pretty fast off creep as well, making it an extremely interesting unit. But you gotta keep in mind, you can only choose between Muscular Augments at one given time or Grooved Spines, or I guess you gotta go for double Hydra then, which I don't really see happening all too often or all too quickly. But here we got the Grooved Spines upgrade. So this is 100, also 71 seconds, but it increases the attack range +2 from 5 range to 7 range. Now, in the past, you would only get 1 additional range on the Grooved Spines upgrade, or I guess with the Muscular Augments upgrade, you would get 1 additional range on your Hydralisk. This is actually huge. Like, not a lot of people seem to be talking about this, but 5 to 7 range, instead of like 6 range and now 7 range, is significant. All of a sudden, the Hydralisk are going to be able to shoot from a massive amount of distance. It may not sound like a huge deal, but in particular if you have units tanking for it, so say Zerglings, say Roaches, say Ravagers, say even Queens, Hydras are going to be able to shoot over those units much more easily than they could in the past, and therefore they're going to have a lot more survivability. You gotta keep in mind, since they also have that movement speed, right? If they're further in the back to begin with, you can also move back with them easier, and a lot of units have trouble to catch up to it. So the combination of like the extra movement speed as well as the extra attack range is very significant, and I don't know, this is going to be a unit that's very flimsy, still will very quickly die if you aren't paying attention, but if it is given a second to overpower your forces, it will absolutely tear it apart. And I wonder how it's going to be useful against things such as, for example, Terran Mech. I think this will also quite a little bit change up Zerg vs Zerg. Right now, Hydra changes aren't very common just because of how powerful Roaches are, but I wouldn't be surprised if you could make something with like Zergling Bane Hydra completely work, as long as the Hydras are allowed to deal their damage, because the range on the Roach is just not very significant, so we'll see how this is going to change up. Next up, we've got the major changes to the Infestor. Can now cast all abilities while burrowed. This is absolutely massive, absolutely huge. And now we also have gained collision radius while burrowed. Radius is smaller than when unburrowed. So what this means is that basically you're always going to be burrowing your Infestor at any given moment, no particular reason not to, because you can now cast all abilities while burrowed. So that means that you can go ahead and cast Infested Terrans while burrowed, just like you always could in the past, I suppose. You can now also cast Fungal Growth while burrowed, which is like, that is absolutely ridiculously powerful. And we have Parasite. Parasite can now also be cast while burrowed. Now, Parasite actually got a buff at the beginning of Legacy of the Void. Nobody actually ever plays it because the Infestor usually doesn't get any work in. But if the opponent does not have detection, Infestors are gonna tear it apart. You're gonna see some crazy setups where Infestors are gonna be used for flanking. They're gonna be moving underground. They're gonna be casting their fungal growths, at which point the Zerg will engage. A huge change to a unit that desperately needs it, to be honest. I wish we could see like a reversion to the changes that they've made to the Infested Terran, like a very long time ago, they basically removed the Infested Terrans upgrades. So in the past, you would always benefit from +1 missile as well as Carapace upgrades and all that. You don't see that quite a lot anymore, so I don't think Infested Terrans will be a unit that we'll see a whole lot. I would really like to see a change to that as well, but other than that, I think these are absolutely massive. Like, this will change up, in particular if your opponent doesn't have any detection, or he doesn't have scans, or he doesn't have a, you know, observer or overseer or whatever. This can absolutely murder, you know, any force out there, right there, just because of the fungal growth. But also, like, landing the neural parasite will be significantly easier than it was in the past. I mean, you can now... Say like a Terran, say like a Protoss player, right, is going for a 2-base all-in against Zerg, and are going with an Immortal-heavy army. Usually, they will push with 3 Immortals, and they will actually push slightly before the Observer will be there. You could actually catch a Protoss army with like 3 Infestors with Neural Parasite while it's still moving in the middle of the map, and actually let the, you know, Immortals just simply kill the entire Protoss force, you know, themselves. That is like the Zerg in me gets way too excited about those kind of things. Anyway, before we ramble on about that for too long, let's talk about the Swarm Host. Cost decreased from 150, 100 to 175, and then we also got the Locust Swoop range that has been increased, as well as the Locust Acid Spit weapon damage that has been decreased. Now, I've actually, in particular in the last couple of weeks, I've played quite a little bit of Swarm Host, and actually, like, as it is right now, there's still a very specific unit that can work, but it's actually surprisingly powerful. So first off, the cost reduction. They're very, very, very cheap. In most like mid to late game scenarios, you're going to be able to afford, say, like 4 to 8 or so. That seems to be the magic number. Locust Swoop range has increased as well. So remember that sometimes if you would get close with your flying Locust to like a missile turret, it wouldn't land until it's like already on top of the missile turret almost. Right now, that swoop range, so the distance that they can swoop in from, is going to be significantly longer. So all of a sudden, they're going to be more powerful in that regard as well against static defense, such as, for example, the missile turret, but also against just general fights. And the damage has been decreased a little bit as well. Now, the one issue that the Swarm Host has always had is that it's very, very supply heavy. So if you make 8 Swarm Hosts, that is going to be a significant chunk of your army that is not going to be fighting. But after playing around for it, or with it for a little while, it seems to be at the very least something that you can afford in a couple of games. And it's surprisingly powerful, in particular on maps where you can easily fly into the main on a natural and your opponent isn't going to be able to easily defend against it. In the current map pool, a good example is King Sejong Station. You can actually make you can actually make Swarm Hosts work on that map quite nicely as it is. And with these changes, it's just going to be more powerful once again. And the thing is, like, this is a unit that it used to be the most common unit for Zerg during Heart of the Swarm. Right now, it's pretty uncommon once again because it is, you know, it was a little bit ridiculous. But I guess this might very well make it something that is a little more common. Although I would really like to see the supply count reduced a little as well, just to make it a more, you know, well-rounded unit that isn't such a big commitment. And then we've also got a couple of so-called simple changes that are arguably speaking more important than the other changes that we've seen for Zerg so far. First and foremost, Centrifugal Hooks, which is a roly-poly upgrade, the upgrade that makes the banelings roll, now increases health by +10 as well, which is huge. Once again, it will give them significantly more survivability. It goes up from 30 HP to 40 HP with this upgrade, which is a 33% health increase. Very, very, very significant, in particular against Terran Bio. Makes it way better, and obviously against Protoss, something like Hydra Bane is already very powerful. It's only gonna get stronger, and I'm actually a little worried for that, but we'll go over that just a little bit. Broodlord range has been decreased from 11 to 10, so the range that they can throw out the Broodlings with is going to be decreased to give Thors a bit of an easier time to deal with them. And then the Ultralisk base armor has been increased from 1 to 2, so they're going to be a little bit more powerful without the chitinous plating upgrade. But the chitinous plating upgrade now decreases to +2 armor instead of +4. So late game Ultras are going to be slightly less powerful, but the base Ultra is going to be a little bit more powerful, giving it a bit of an interesting change. And I wouldn't be surprised if something like an Ultra through a Broodlord switch will be very, very common after this patch goes live. Alrighty, next up we've got the final race, and that is going to be Protoss. For Protoss, our emphasis lies in 2 places. Even out the strengths of the race harassment options and increase the combined power of Stargate play. Changes to the Tempest, Carrier, and Void Ray serve to bolster Stargate units, while alterations to many of the Protoss harassment units should balance out their backline capabilities. So first and foremost, we got a redesign to the Tempest once again. This is not the same of the Tempest that we saw initially when they announced these changes. It actually once again got a new ability. The new Tempest role versus air remains the same, so it still has a significant amount of range to anti-air, while it's becoming more of a utility spellcaster versus ground units. It has a new ability called Disruption Blast. This stuns ground units in a 1.95 radius for 7 seconds, giving an accompanying Protoss army a window to move in and lay waste. Supply count has increased from 4 to 6, so messing on it is going to be very difficult. Ground attack damage has been increased from 30 to 35. Ground attack range has been decreased from 15 to 8, so you need to be far closer to the target right now before you can really deal damage. And we've got a new ability called Disruption Blast. Now, basically what Disruption Blast is good for is to deal with Protoss versus Terran in particular. So notice all the buffs to Terran mech. Protoss would be in a little bit of trouble if they don't have something to deal with it significantly. And a lot of people aren't too happy with the Disruption Blast over like the Disruption Sphere, I believe is what it was called in the past. But I actually like it quite a bit. It stuns units now rather than actually killing them. So it has a 4-second cast time, and basically what happens is that like it spews out like a ball of pulsing energy, and units that are caught in the little circle will be stunned. So that means that the Protoss can push in. Say like a Terran player is turtling up with a lot of siege tanks. You can actually not push in as a Protoss because pretty much all of your units are armored, it feels like. So you really need to make sure that you're going to be able to stun out, you know, units such as, for example, a siege tank. And I feel like this is a pretty good way of doing it. Now, the issue is that you need to be rather close as well with the Tempest before you can make it use. And obviously, Terrans usually have like waves of siege tank, which is, you know, making it difficult to really use the Tempest in that regard. But at the very least, it has a bit of a better utility instead of just having like a significant, you know, stupid amount of range to do a lot of damage from a distance and not really giving, you know, Terran mech a chance to do any work. Because as it is right now, once a, you know, Terran player tries to go for mech, Protoss will just simply start making a lot of Tempest, and that's basically game over. So this is going to make it's effectively a Tempest nerf, to be completely frank with you, but it will make it at least more interesting as far as like counterplays go. Then we've also got some major changes to the carrier. Ability called Release Interceptors has now been removed. The Interceptor cost has been reduced from 25 minerals to 5 minerals, which is obviously like the little tiny ship that flies around the carrier. And the build Interceptor is now set to autocast by default. So this is going to make it a more of like a late game type of army type of focus, I suppose. The thing is that usually you would have to choose between a Tempest, which is like the same cost as a carrier, and a carrier. Now that the Tempest is getting significantly more army supply, that does mean that you need to really, you know, weigh your options a lot more carefully, as they aren't automatically the better option. Carriers are going to be quite a bit stronger, in particular because build Interceptors is way cheaper now, and really only in like base trade kind of scenarios where both players aren't really mining anymore. Are they going to be a bad option? If you manage to get carriers out, they're extremely powerful. It's just, you know, getting them out that is the difficult part, and in most scenarios it won't really change to the current version of the game. If your opponent is aware of what's going on, they can still counter the unit just fine. But if you let Protoss turtle and you let Protoss just simply sit back, get a massive round of carriers, they're going to roll over you, which is scary. And then the one ability called the Shadow Strike. Now this is something that the internet is freaking out on. I want to say it's not that big of a deal. So basically, Shadow Strike is an ability that gives Dark Templar blink. Whoa, mind blown. Okay, everyone's complaining about this ability, but honestly, if you're anywhere near like a reasonable player, I don't want to be mean to anyone, right? But if you're a reasonable player, this is not going to be affecting your harass in the earliest stage of the game. Notice the research time, 121 seconds. That is 2 minutes of research time, okay? If you die to blink Dark Templar, you would have most definitely died to several warpins of Dark Templar 2 minutes prior. Okay, this is not an harassment tool. This is not something people will use to, you know, try and kill their opponent straight up with. Instead, what they will use it for is for a late game harassment option. So right now, as it is, once the opponent goes Dark Templar, really the only thing that Dark Templar is good for is the initial harassment, after which you can really only go for a little bit of maybe Archon morphing, and that's about it. Whereas with the Shadow Strike ability, if the game gets to the later stages of it, you can now use the Dark Templar as a counter to many of the harassment options. You know what the issue is? Like, once a player sets up their defensive structures and their detection, so say like a missile turret and a bunker or a missile turret or whatever, right? If they've got those set up, the Dark Temporal are completely nullified and it can't do anything anymore. However, when you give them Blink, all of a sudden in the later stages of the game, they're once again gonna have some utility and they can once again be used in particular to pick up like reinforcements, to get into the production, and it really is an interesting concept and it really is a very, very cool way of playing it. Now, a lot of people freak out, think it's too powerful. It's not, guys. It's not. It's just a cool late game spell that will make the unit a little bit more exciting to use. And then last but not least, we got the simple changes. Zealot base movement speed upgrade from the research charge upgrade, which is an upgrade you can get in the Twilight Council to make them charge at units. Now also gives them additional movement speed, so about 10% additional movement speed. The Adept Shade Vision has been reduced significantly, so Adepts will be quite a little bit weaker when it comes to scouting options in the early stages of the game. Basically, the vision range that you normally have when you're shading with the shade itself is going to be significantly smaller, so you can't just scout an entire base with just the shade. You actually need to like commit and let the Adept go all the way in before you can start doing scouting, which is great. Void Ray speed has been increased as well to make that Stargate play a little bit more well-rounded and make the Void Ray a unit that's actually, you know, reasonable. And then we have the War Prism that got its health reduced from 100 to 80 to make harassment options, such as, for example, Archon Harass and all that, a little bit weaker. And I would say that's actually pretty cool. I really like these changes that they have done. In particular, those simple changes that they have done to the Protoss. Now, once again, these changes are going to go live next week, but I don't think they're going to be very balanced right from the get-go. I actually think that Protoss is sort of getting the short end of the stick, at the very least as far as the early to mid-game options go. You may have noticed that Protoss got nerfed quite a little bit, and they've got some more powerful Stargate play in the later stages of the game. But things such as like Hydra Bane will absolutely roll over Protoss. I've had so many games where I just am allowed to get 3 bases, I just start making Hydras and Banes, and I just roll over my opponent, right? The same really goes for Terran versus Protoss. I don't really see how like a good Protoss player could easily defend against the Terran's harassment options. The thing is that they're not really getting any kind of mid-game buffs other than a slight buff to the Void Ray movement speed as well as a slight buff to the charge lots, I suppose, when they already have charge. It's going to be very difficult for Protoss players to hang on. I wouldn't be surprised if like in the next month or two we will see a mid-game buff as well to the Protoss units or a nerf to the other races to make you know, the mid-game a little bit more doable for Protoss. But all in all, I gotta be honest, I really like these changes. I think they're, you know, I think they're awesome. Basically, all of the underperforming segments of the game have been addressed, and with that, the game is only, you know, it's only going to be better from here on out, right? And while maybe some people won't enjoy it initially when they first introduce these, I think in a year or so from now, these are going to be changes that are going to be absolutely awesome and that everyone is going to be happy with, as the meta game will be allowed to evolve a lot more actively. Anyhow, I hope you guys enjoyed watching this video. If you haven't already, make sure you like it down below. And if you're, you know, interested in watching more StarCraft 2 content, make sure you hit that subscribe button as well. Also, while you're at it, go ahead and follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. The links are in the description. And by the way, if you've got any kind of question, definitely do let me know down below in the comments. I'll try my very best to keep an eye out and answer each and every one of them. At the very least, you know, if it's something that I can easily answer. And also, if you're, you know, an experienced StarCraft 2 player, definitely go ahead and help out some other people in the comments down below, which is awesome. I always love seeing that happen. But anyway, other than that, I want to thank you all very much so for watching. Have an amazing day. Do not forget to smile, alright? And I'll see you in the next one.